Digitalization is a buzzword. It's 2023 and everyone is talking about it. When most people think of digitalization, they usually visualize something technology related. Artificial intelligence, blockchain, virtual reality, robots, metaverse, ChatGPT. What if I told you that this was not true digitalization? I don't want to talk about any of that today. Digitalization is not that complicated. It is just the process of being virtual, a process that all of us are a part of. So I was born at the onset of the digital age. I am a millennial, so I grew up with the internet. I witnessed the shift in information sources from encyclopedia and physical books to Google. I grew up in a middle-class family in a non-cosmopolitan town in the east of India. We did not have a Wi-Fi connection at home, so I remember that to connect to the internet, my father would take me to an internet cafe. You know, the ones where you can get online on a pay-per-hour basis. I got my first smartphone when I was an adult, and I got my first laptop when I started engineering school. So as my digital journey progressed and I surrounded myself with computers, digital devices, and the world of social media, there was another realization that revealed itself during this phase of my life. I realized that I was a minority. I was among the 1/4 of women who had made it into engineering school. But this was just the starting point of this realization, because the ratios of women were only going to be decreasing from then on in my life. 10 years ago, I moved to Europe, to a place where I had no family, no network, and no friends. This time I became a minority, not by gender, but by race and ethnicity. As a woman, especially as a woman of color, you realize it quite fast that you might not have access to the same opportunities as your counterparts. I will not get into the reasons on why the opportunities are less or different, but I want to share with you a surprising moment that I had which defined the next chapter of my life. So it was the year 2013. I had just moved to Europe. I was on the Eurorail from France to Germany. I did not have a local SIM card because I had just moved. So I had looked up the train route and the stop where I was supposed to get off to make my connection. I got on the train and I got seated in one of those table booths. The ticket inspector came and I took out my printed ticket from my handbag and I showed it to the inspector. The inspector then looked at it, he stamped it, and then he moved on to the passenger who was sitting in front of me. Now I observed that this passenger took out his smartphone and he pointed it to the window. And he showed his train ticket on his phone, and then the train inspector moved on. So obviously, I glanced to the window. And there I saw that there was a code, a QR code to connect to the internet. Now, this was 2013. So having Wi-Fi, especially free Wi-Fi, in public transport was a huge deal. I realized that I actually had privilege, a privilege which I had overlooked. I had the privilege of digital access. 34% of the world's population today has no access to the internet. That's nearly 3 billion people. So if you're listening to this TEDx talk today, I want you to take a moment to recognize the privilege that you have. So what can you do with this privilege? When I had this realization, I got a source of inspiration, a push to use this privilege to create opportunities for myself, opportunities that I would otherwise not have the access to. I went all in. For the first time in my life, I felt that I had a level playing field, an opportunity to break out of my circle, to find work, to find my community, to find my network, to find friends. And then 3 years ago, there was another life-changing event. But this was not just for me, but for the entire world. COVID-19, an event that impacted all areas of life, from the economy and work to the private life. An event that also accelerated digitalization. I was optimistic. If digitalization had created all of these opportunities for me, I was waiting for it to do wonders for everyone around me. But what I observed was different. Even though digitalization advanced developments in technology and working models, it pushed companies and it transformed businesses, the number of people who were using digitalization to create opportunities for themselves did not significantly increase. I got curious. In 2021, I made a study. I interviewed a group of 100 people split across the different generations who had digital access to understand how they were using digitalization personally and professionally. And what I found out was interesting. Almost half of the people were hesitant to fully embrace digitalization. They were not so sure about the scope of digitalization and the value that it can bring beyond social media. Some of the reasons that came up were privacy. Some people were concerned about sharing too much online and being vulnerable in a place which they cannot fully trust. And I understand that. Some people were concerned with perception. How would they be perceived in the online world? Because their online personas were as important to them as their offline ones. And some people said that they lacked digital literacy. They did not have the skills and the knowledge to fully use the digital tools and applications that were out there. So then I dug deeper. What differentiated the people who were using digitalization for themselves from the ones that were not? I did not speak to the most successful entrepreneurs of the digital era, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Ma, or the creators of big digital platforms and online businesses. I spoke to the people who were using digitalization for a personal mission. The self-taught photographer who was using digital tools to showcase her work. The health educator who was using social media to educate about mental health. The mother who formed a digital community to hype other women. These were the people that I was speaking with. And the insights of this exercise were surprising. This group of people did not have a tech background, and they were not the so-called digital natives or Gen Z, but rather there were two differentiating behaviors of this group of people. First, this group of people had a curious mindset. They were critical about any new trend or technology that was coming up, but they were also willing to educate themselves about the potential risks and the benefits. This group of people, when they downloaded an app on their phone, would go and check the settings and see what data they were sharing and inform themselves about cybersecurity. The second differentiating behavior was that this group of people were intentional. They were intentional about which digital tools and apps they were using, why they were using it, and what they wanted to get out of it. So my question to you is, are you willing to have the mindset and the intention to fully embrace digitalization? I want you to take a look at the apps on your phone. Have you used them to the full potential to create opportunities for yourself? If your answer is no, then you should listen closely to the next part. So in my journey, I have explored the ways how digitalization has created opportunities for diverse groups of people. Let me share with you 3 things which you can do to also start creating opportunities for yourself going forward in your life. First, find your digital voice. A few years ago, I was discussing with my father that I had some ideas which I think could benefit other people. Ideas about topics, socioeconomic topics, which were not so openly spoken about, some which could be perceived as controversial. And I remember my father telling me, well, why don't you share it? Share it online. Who is looking over your shoulder? At that point in my life, I realized that I had been waiting all of this time to find the permission to use my own digital voice, a permission which I did not need. So I started my podcast first as a way to share my own voice, and then as a way to amplify other voices that matter. So finding your digital voice doesn't mean that you should also start a podcast or an audio blog, but find the digital format that can represent you, whether that's audio, video, text, or any other multimedia format, but find the format that you can use to share your interests, your passions, and what you stand for, but find your digital voice. Second, upskill digitally. The way to close the digital literacy gap is to upskill digitally. Today, there is a digital, easy to digest, often free resource for everything. Examples of these resources can be online courses, webinars, and virtual events. I wish that more people in the world would find these free resources and empower themselves. If you have digital access, you do have access to resources. Third, form digital connections. You might have heard about the 6 degrees of separation theory. It states that any person on the planet can be connected to any other person on the planet through 5 intermediaries. Today, because of digitalization, this has reduced from 6 degrees of separation to 3 degrees of separation. When I was looking for my first full-time job in Europe, I thought that all the odds were against me. I did not speak the local language. I did not have the time to invest in professional relationships. And I did not have the money to attend events and conferences. I made over 500 applications over a span of 1 year, and I got over 500 rejections. Till I connected with somebody on LinkedIn, and I wrote them a DM. We had an online introduction, and they connected me to the recruiter, who then connected me to the hiring manager, and that opened the doors for me. How often do we hear success stories of how people landed their jobs? Digital networking is everything to break out of closed environments. If you don't have access to mentors, to role models, to people with privilege, it is time to start investing in forming those digital connections. The last words I want to leave with you today is on the outlook. Digital disruption is inevitable. And any new trend or technology that will come up will create some really big issues and concerns. But we are now living in a new chapter of the post-pandemic era. And this is the best time to be using digitalization to create opportunities for yourself. I have come a long way from being an introvert, finding my own digital voice, amplifying other voices, breaking barriers, to delivering a TEDx talk, all because at some point in my life, I realized my privilege of digital access, and I used it to change my life. I invite you to do the same. Thank you very much.